Good morning from Austin, Texas. Good evening to you in Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, and welcome to this program. Let me introduce our panelists before we start. Professor Maurice Amutabi. I've known him for close to 30 years. He was my colleague in the US Academy. He attended our conferences. And some years ago, they began to call him the Toyin Falola of East Africa. Amutabi is very famous. He hosts this annual conference. He's been a distinguished administrator, managing 2 universities, directing a program, and recently, with our colleague Nasongo, we co-edited the handbook of Kenya, which during the week won a major award as one of the best historical materials of 2024. Welcome, Professor Maurice Amutabi. Welcome. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
My dear friend, Professor Mary Nyangweso, a scholar of religious studies based in East Carolina University, where occupies a distinguished chair, the Woolard and Ellen Peel Distinguished Chair. A teacher of mine used to be called Peel, distinguished scholar of religion as well, is of blessed memory. He wrote on the Yoruba people, extremely distinguished. And I did a book in honor of Peel. Nyangweso works on African religions, gender, and sexuality. He went to school receiving his PhD at Drew University, and she's the author of Female Genital Cutting by Prager 2014, and Nobis published her book, The Interplay Between Religion, Gender, and Culture. We also have the distinguished Professor Muyia Nafukho. Thanks for joining us. A long distinguished career, an amiable person, always smiling, and a vice provost for academic personnel, professor of management and organization at the Foster School of Business, where he holds a joint appointment in the College of Education, and is an occupant of the Presidential Term Professorship at the University of Washington, Seattle. I hope it's not raining today in Seattle. He's received numerous awards and honors and fellowship, served as Professor of Educational Administration and Human Resources, and is a Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs. We have Professor Eunice Kamaara, our distinguished panelist, Professor of African Christian Ethics. She's been an academic for over 30 years, teaching, learning, transforming research, focusing on holistic health and well-being. Today, she directs the African Character Initiation Program, a participatory organization to advise adults on issues of their health and values. And she co-directs the Chaplaincy Training Center at Moi University, Moi Teaching Hospital. Our publication record is staggering, well over 100. Welcome. These are the panelists. The way this is going to run, for those of you who want to ask questions or make contributions, Please wait till all our panelists are done. And after our panelists are done, I will throw, please, you have to make sure our technical people, please unmute other than the panelists. Don't mute everyone other than the panelists. For those of you who are new to Professor Ogot, he has enjoyed a distinguished career with tremendous rewards, awards, and honor. I met him in different locations. He's my elder. I went looking for him in Kenya. We met at UNESCO meetings in France. We invited him to Texas. I went to see him in Houston. We met during the African Studies Association. I was there when he received the African Distinguished Award, which in later years I also received. The background to his scholarship is located in the changes after the Second World War. I'm not reading this speech, I'm talking so that if I omit something, it's not deliberate. After the Second World War, Africa entered the age of reform. The colonial empire was about to be dismantled. The options that that empire had were limited. Either they injected more violence and force, as they did in Kenya with the Mau Mau. They could try to convert a settler colony and injected more police, as they did in Algeria. They could create segregationist societies, as they did with apartheid in South Africa. But the options were very, very limited because Africans had become radicalized, seeking development, seeking reforms. And part of what they had to concede was the establishment of African universities. And in that concession, realizing the struggles, they created Makerere, Legon, Ghana, and Ibadan. And years later, Africans in power created many of their universities, like Kenyatta University, more universities. Within the crucibles of that decolonial movement, that is where you have to locate the career of Professor Ogot, because those universities were nationalist projects. And those who began to work there and who began to advance their careers and talk about Africanity were thinking in terms of the African perspectives. In the process, what we now label as nationalist historiography emerged. Nationalist historiography was a major, major achievement. The pride in Africa, the centralization of African history, the idea that Africans could build their own nations, the ideas that these institutions had been there for a long time, the idea that the depth and the breadth of history were expansive, dating back millions of years, thousands of years before Christ. And they began to say that you cannot start African history with the colonial conquest, that you cannot attribute change in Africa solely to that conquest. And they began to map out all these various achievements, all these changes, all these transformations. And in doing so, they laid the basis of the teaching of modern African history. They collaborated on a large scale, and pillars emerged: Makerere, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, Edu Boain wrote the history of West Africa, which was used to teach West African history. Ade Ajayi in Nigeria became a pillar. And in East Africa, Professor Ogot became the pillar of that African historiography. And they inserted this African historiography into our universities. As pioneers, they have the privilege not just of reimagining new departments, or they set up the curricula, both at the university level and at the secondary school level. I was a beneficiary. I had to do 2 exams at the GCE in London, O level and A level. But the Kenyan West African Examination Council had also been established. So I also did the West African Examination Council exam, just as my colleagues did East African one. And they pioneered publishing houses. So we have to be very grateful for them. In the 60s, Ogot joined these pillars in the UNESCO project, the 8 volumes, and he was given the task of editing one of the volumes, a major achievement of that era. The UNESCO volumes is now being updated. Gaddafi donated $2 million towards its revision at some time. Sadawi did a major TV documentary around this UNESCO project, also a very successful program. We will talk about the challenges. What happened after African historiography? We'll talk about those challenges, and we'll close with those challenges. What are younger people doing now? How are they extending this legacy? In what ways are they building on what people have done? That is my short introduction. And at this point, I want to offer our condolence on behalf of all my panelists, on behalf of all the members of the audience. We are so many, we have honored him. We are so many, I'm so happy now. Even on Zoom alone, we are close to 200. On YouTube, we're so many. And we stream this program to television stations, radio stations, and people have joined us in massive number. To the family of Ogot, you have a mother to be proud of blessed memory, a major writer, an activist, a politician, a cultural icon, a feminist, and a leader. But you also have a father who you have to be proud of. Various awards, receive honorary doctorates, various prizes, recognized in different countries. He served his country at various levels as a writer, a scholar, a historian, a mentor to a different set of generation, a father, a chancellor of a university, an educator, and a moral missionary. He also received even a moral award from his former university. May his soul rest in peace. May he join his ancestors. May he keep a nice watch on all of us. I'm sure he's watching this program, and he will bless all of us for blessing him.
Amen.
I want to now move to our panelists, and I will ask them to pay a tribute and tell us about Professor Ogot's contribution. I want to start with Professor Eunice Kamaara, not just because she's a religious person who has the capacity to pray and do some divination, but we always have to give leadership to our women, our sisters, our mothers, our grandmother. They are our leaders. Eunice, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Falola. I thought it would be very difficult for me to talk about the contributions of Professor Bethwell Ogot, and therefore I put down a short poem, which I'm going to recite as my tribute to Professor Bethwell Ogot. Okay. They say a library has burnt down. We do not agree. That library remains around. This we agree. Published and in the minds of many, for he was a teacher to many. They say his favorite place was his library desk. We do not agree. That is temporary desk. This we agree. Grateful and joyful, he is now a soul, united with many a soul. They say his commitment was to scholarship. We do not agree. That's a different authorship. This we agree. United, he would agree that all disciplines, from math and philosophy, history springs. They say he loved African history. We do not agree. That's a colonial story. This we agree. A free soul, now a free soul, united with grace, his lovely soulmate. Fare thee well, my mentor, till we meet again. Thank you.
Do you want to say more? You're done with the poem?
Given an opportunity, of course, I would say more. I would say that I met Professor Bethwell Ogot closely in the early 1990s at a Historical Association of Kenya conference held at the T Hotel in Kericho. And I was amazed at the way he was good at nurturing young scholars. Of course, I was a small girl then, and I was presenting one of my first papers in any conference ever, and I was expecting a lot of bombarding from all corners, you know, after I presented. I was waiting to be bombarded from all corners. But to my surprise, the first response came from Professor Bethwell Ogot himself, and it was a word of affirmation. He was like, I like what this girl is talking about. He actually called me a girl, and I was not offended. Perhaps I should have been, but I wasn't offended. I took it as a gentle way of, you know, nurturing young scholars. So I would say that since then, we've had a good relationship with Professor Ogot. We have associated on a number of occasions, with more lately inviting me to his birthday parties and various occasions. And close home, when I visited, I was able to observe a number of things, which I'll be talking about in the course of this webinar. So I'll reserve the rest for the next round. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Let me call on my brother, my elder, Fred, to make his presentation.
Thank you, Professor Toyin Falola, for organizing this significant virtual event in honor of a distinguished international scholar, Professor Bethwell Ogot. Today, we gather to mourn and to pay tribute to a titan of African scholarship, a great educator, and a distinguished scholar who showed us that our history is important, our stories matter, our voices as human beings deserve to be heard, and hence the importance of telling our own stories. Professor Ogot didn't just research and write history. He restored dignity to our past. Through his seminal research, his passionate teaching, and his profound writings, he helped us understand who we were, who we are, and who we might become. Professor Ogot's footprints, as he humbly called them in his autobiography, are not mere impressions in the sand. They're carved into a bedrock of African and international scholarship, creating a path that future generations will follow. His work transformed not just how the world sees Africa, but how Africa sees itself. As we say goodbye to Professor Bethwell Ogot, let us remember that the greatest tribute we can pay him is to continue his work, to keep telling our stories, to keep seeking truth, to keep building bridges between the past and present and future. For us, he taught us, history is not just about the past, it is about understanding who we are and imagining who we might become. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So you remember the famous book by Odiambo and his colleague located in Siaya about Beria, the politics of Beria. So Fred, what do you think this death represents? What does it mean to die? Eunice said his library is still with us. What does it really mean to die?
Well, I think it was Socrates who said, if you see a sad person, that person will not remain sad forever. The person will be smiling at one time. If you see a happy person, the happiness will not last forever. And we can extend and say, if you see a living person, that person will be transformed into another state, what we call death. And now let me extend. If you see a dead person, that is not the end of the state. That person may be transformed into something else. And in the case of Professor Ogot, his writings will live with us. So his passing on is just a reminder to us and a challenge that we should take over from where he has left and continue to advance his thinking.
Eunice, if you listen to his answer, he's not saying he's an ancestor. He's just saying we'll continue to read them, War and Society in East Africa. Is he an ancestor now?
For me, I would use John Beatty's term of the living dead,
okay,
to mean that he's still with us, he's living, because we remember him, we remember his works, we actually have him very close in our presence.
okay.
Not physically, of course, but spiritually. But in due course, he may go, he may transform to become an ancestor, in which case probably most of the generations who know him will also have transited, and therefore he will become an ancestor. But he lives on in whatever state. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Nyangweso, it's now your turn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for inviting me to be on this panel. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on this very important day as we honor Professor Bethwell Ogot. Now, Bethwell Ogot has been described as the Kenya's ultimate historian. I could not agree more. I'll call him the Africa's greatest historian. The mention of the word history triggers his name amongst all Africans who studied his work. And I'm very fortunate to have known him, mentored by him, and collaborated with him in some of his work. So it is impossible to grow up in Kenya as a scholar without really reading his work. I mean, we've seen some of his publications and we read some of them. And I'm very, very proud to have gotten to read some of his work. I remember when he brought us to this conference that Eunice mentioned earlier, and how he mentored us and encouraged us to work and to continue to publish, to contribute to what Africa is all about. His contributions to African history, specifically East African history, have not only left an enduring impact on the knowledge of the region, but he also helped open the world to great cultural values and accomplishments of people of East Africa and the entire continent. He illuminated light in the dark continent. He helped lead the way in us showing the world what Africa has and what Africa can be. His accomplishments are most valuable as resources for African scholars to continue to build on and to let the world understand Africa better. Faith wrote a piece in the Kenyan News and described his work this way. She said, "Because of his scholarly work, we have a deep understanding of who we are as Kenyans, the road we have traveled, and the challenges ahead." While he produced numerous works, and that we have all read, and that we want all our younger generation to read, and pointed us to challenges that Africa faces to this day, his piece, "My Footprints in the Sand of Time," that Nafukho just mentioned, rings very true in calling upon us as scholars, as children, to do the same, to leave a footprint to this continent, leave footprints in the knowledge about Africa. So I think his mentorship reminds me about what he wanted us to do. He realized that as young generations, we needed to take over his work and continue the work. He knew he would pass on, and we also know we'll pass on. We want to make sure that the younger generation continues his work. So I'm really honored to be on this panel to celebrate his life, to celebrate his accomplishments. And may God bless his soul, and may he rest peacefully eternally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, our distinguished professor. Maurice, is now your turn. Professor Maurice Amutabi.
Thank you for the honor. Thank you for the opportunity. I want to thank the panelists who have come before me, my colleagues, Professor Muyia, Professor Nyangweso, Professor Eunice Kamaara, and Professor Falola, for this opportunity to share what I know throughout my relation with Professor B. Ogot. I met Professor Bethwell Ogot when I was an undergraduate at the University of Nairobi in 1986. And after that time, after knowing him for the first time, we had read about his books in high school. A famous name, Professor Ogot, Professor Were, Professor Muriuki. These are names we read in high school textbooks. So seeing him for the first time at the university and shaking his hand was such a big privilege. And since that time, we started to see him more frequently. In 87, we spent the whole day together when Chinua Achebe was visiting the University of Nairobi in 87. 88, Ekwenzi came on campus, Cyprian Ekwenzi, And then he had this habit of rounding us up as undergraduates from our lecture halls, whenever a prominent scholar was on campus, like when Adu Bohene visited, when Andele came, and Ajay. Each time a scholar came, he'll organize a workshop for us to see these people as real human beings. At one time also, he's a great, like Professor Roland Oliver. When Oliver came to the university, and Roland Oliver was his professor at the University of London, it was such a privilege to introduce us to those people like Theo Ranger, among others. So we came to know him as a very illuminated person, very influential, very insightful, to the point that I refer to him as a Kenya's academic Moses for Kenya's history. In some of the articles that I wrote about his passing, I described him as an academic Goliath with the Solomonic mind, because of the way he wrote, the way he talked, the way he shared stories. And I'm happy that Professor Mary Nyangweso and Eunice Kamaara and Professor Nafukho, Nasongo and others attended the Kericho conference sponsored by UNESCO, at which he gave illuminating stories. One of the stories I told in one of the dailies about the Second World War and the response from Liberia. So he was such a wonderful storyteller, and he referred to us very, very eloquently, and he will praise you. And we sought affirmation, like Professor Eunice Kamaara said from him. When he said that's a good paper, we believed him, and he encouraged us to go on. So besides creating awareness of African history to the world and putting African history on the map, Professor Ogot was a great mentor, and we benefited from people that he mentored. I can regard myself as Professor Ogot's academic grandchild, because he taught two of my professors who are his sons, Professor Atieno Diambo and Professor Gideon Eswere and Professor Moruki were students of B. Ogot. So I was always reminding him of being the academic grandchild of his academic progression. And he got to love me because of the historical manner in which he perceived me from the very village I was born, and he used to refer to me as a grandson of Nganyi, the rainmaker. Each time he never referred to me by my name, but the grandson of Nganyi, the rainmaker. And he will tell me how he passed the village of Nganyi when he walked from Maseno to Yala, when the schools opened, when the schools closed. He always admired the shrines of Ebusiekwe. So it created a great mind in me in terms of reviving and writing about these local histories of rainmakers of Bunyore, of the so-called strategic food reserves that the people of Western Kenya had in terms of granaries and all that, the so-called micro-histories. He also illuminated a great deal of attention for me, especially when he shifted from mathematics to history. And he always made that encounter, and I'll talk about this later in my later response on his transformation from a mathematics teacher to a historian. This episode in his life provides us a very, very strong point in terms of how to shift gears from one discipline to another with a lot of ease. And I think I'll talk about that later when I'll be given time. Then he was transformative, and he had to transform the understanding of African history by injecting oral sources, which prior to that were regarded as peripheral in the writing of history. We also admire him because of resolving a great ambivalence in scholarship about African history and African past. When he was at Makerere doing his diploma, there was only one paper, History of Tropical Africa, which he changed when he became head of department at the University of Nairobi about 10 years later. He was also a great reconstructionist, reconstructing African history, Kenyan history from nothing to the great history of Kenya that we have today. And I'm happy that Professor Valola mentioned the book we published last year. Professor Valola and I and Professor Nasongo edited a book on the history of Kenya through Palgrave Macmillan, and it was voted the best history text by the American Library Association. So I want to applaud Professor Ogot, because it's because of him that all this is coming to fruition through our hands. And he always said that I believe my academic sons and grandchildren will continue the mantle that you have started. You're the first true academic historian in Kenya, and alongside DK from Nigeria, Ajani, and others, Tio Ranger recognized them in a speech that I listened to as an undergraduate when Tio Ranger spoke at the University of Nairobi in 1987, praising Ogot and touching his shoulder and saying that this young man, Ogot at that time I think was in his 60s, and Ranger was saying this will not be the way it is. Ability and resilience, obstacles in his career, right from Maseno to Makerere to the University of Nairobi, and one of which, of course, came to fruition in 1969. And he talked to us about this many times. But now he was arrested and interrogated about the special edition of Kenya, the Journal of East Africa, which he edited and was talking about Tom Mboya and how Tom Mboya was assassinated by the Mandarins, by the mafiosi within the government of Kenya at that time. And he was put at great pain in terms of being interrogated to find out his intentions of making this a public spectacle in terms of how the government handled the assassination of Tom Mboya. We also celebrated him because of his many writings, which were very well written, especially the history of the Southern Luo and many other works of history that he wrote. One of his, I think, his best writing is his autobiography, which all of us have read many times, and how he celebrates his village, how he celebrates local heroes or people that may not be mentioned in the meta histories or what one can call mega histories. He mentions them in a manner that indicates his awareness of the place of the big and the small in the historical narrative. He did a great job in terms of mentoring, and like Eunice has said, he was very progressive in terms of recognizing talent at a very young age. I remember when I was being dismissed by a colleague from Maseno University in my first ever conference presentation in 1992 at Gulf Motel in Kisumu, sponsored by the Historical Association of Kenya. He came to my rescue and told the colleague from Maseno that this young man should be given accolades for going to the archive and collecting materials on Mau Mau in Western Kenya, because nobody had thought about the role of people from Western Kenya in Mau Mau. Because before that, Mau Mau was regarded as a Kikuyu affair, but I was trying to expand the horizons of Mau Mau to be regarded as other ethnic groups played a role in Mau Mau, making it a nationalist movement. So thank you very much for this opportunity, Professor Falola. Thank you very much for listening to me, because of the mentorship of Professor Bethwell Ogot, who was aggressively focused and articulate. We have had a lot to learn from him, and you'll see that in our writings. They are all elements of plagiarized stylistics from the likes of Ogot, Ajayi, and so on, because they were our mentors, and we are trying to admire how they wrote, and we are following in their footsteps in terms of how they wrote history and so on. He contextualized history in a manner that has never been done before, and is directing the General East of Africa under UNESCO. He inspired many of us. And I remember at one time during a publication of some of our chapters, I remember I think Professor Mary Nyangweso was there and Eunice Kamaara and others at Maseno when he was launching a book. That was my second book ever in my life at Maseno University. And you arrived there and you are given this very big book with your chapter inside there. It was great admiration. We took pictures with him, we celebrated him, and we're still celebrating him. We wish the family humble period and God's comfort during this time of mourning. And we know that as a scholar, his memory will live on in his writings and the memories that we are doing right now, and all kinds of memorization that are going to come up after this. I've had a chance to dedicate a book to him. One of the books I edited, I dedicated the book to him. And I know there will be more dedications this year and more and beyond to the memory of Professor Bethwell Ogot. Thank you very much for that opportunity, Professor Toyin Falola. Let me hand the candle back to you.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you a question, but I will provide a context. I knew him I knew Edu Boahen. It was a moment of intellectual continentalism when I was in school. So the professor teaching us East African history was from East Africa. Ogot Biptek was with us on my campus. But the current generation, not only do they not know one another, opportunities have diminished. I went to University of Nairobi one time, and I went to the history department. The only person I knew was the one who served on a UNESCO project with me. The other historians, I did not know them. I was shocked because even as an undergraduate, it was not like that. So today, if somebody comes from Makerere to Kenyatta, somebody comes from Ibadan to Kenyatta, you may not know anyone. So what is going on and how can we correct this problem? Let me start with you, Maurice.
Yeah. Let me begin with with thanking you for this question, because it's one that is at the center of my agony on how we are doing studies in Africa. Because during my days as undergraduates at the University of Nairobi, there were all these visiting professors from West Africa, from South Africa, from North Africa, because we got to know about Andela, we got to know about Bohen, about Colin Bandi, about Samir Amin, through workshops and conferences. Isa Shivji, they all came to the University of Nairobi. These great African scholars like Achima Feje, people like Wamba Dia Wamba, Ernest Wamba Dia Wamba, they came to the University of Nairobi through these workshops of interactions and so on. And in your undergraduates and graduate students, we often were invited to go and basically serve as pagers, giving out programs, pens, giving out conference bags during on the registration desk and so on. So it made us actually interact with these individuals, like Professor Grace Bingera from Uganda, Professor Itandala from Tanzania, Professor Isara Kimambo from Tanzania. We got to know about them through the workshops that Professor Ogot and William Ocheng and others were organizing. It also allowed us to move around. And then when I was doing my master's, I had a chance to move to many universities. And when I just joined more universities as a lecturer in '92, I was able to go to Maseno University, to Baraton University through Professor Nonga Gudumo, we got to University through Professor Chris Wanjala. So we moved around a lot. And this allowed us to interact and bounce ideas, good and bad, against these great professors and the correctors, illuminate our paths and so on. So I agree with you that we seem to have lost these. The historical situation of Kenya right now is almost in permanent decline since Ogot and Ocheng left the scene. But the remaining scholars have become very ambivalent in terms of joint scholarship. Even holding online discussions has become scarce. Yet it costs you nothing to hold or very little to hold this online webinars and so on. So I agree with you, Prof. Falola, that we need to revive these, because you encounter people from the other day. I was given the files to review professors for promotion in 2 of our universities. I was sent files because I'm a full professor. So they sent me promotion files for historians in 2 of our public universities. I don't know them. I've never even heard about them. And they're applying to become associate or full professor. Then I say, what's going on? But during those days, it was very rare for you to be a Kenyan scholar and not know about a Kenyan scholar in another part of Kenya or Uganda, Tanzania, and so on. We met under Osarea, under Kodesrea workshops in Dar es Salaam, in Makerere, and these meetings were commonplace. We took buses to those places. We took aircraft to those places. If you didn't have an air ticket, you took a bus, and the following day you're in Dar es Salaam or in Uganda. But I think there's a sense in which the online webinars can also help us to interact and link up, because this is a gap I think we are seeing. because I met Professor Eunice Kamaara, I met Professor Mary Nyangweso, I met Professor Nasongo, Professor Fred Muyia, Professor Machara Munene, we met all these individuals in Historical Association of Kenya meetings and other conferences like Third World Association of Third World Studies and so on, which allowed us to interact. But this, there's a gap in this, and I'm happy that Professor Valola is raising this, that our scholars in East Africa don't know about scholars in West Africa who are writing about the African continent, in Ghana, you know, in Senegal. I saw my former colleague met Ngom Falungom as a major project in Senegal and so on. And I was sharing with a Kenyan colleague the other day, they don't know about those projects. Falola has written over 200 books. Twain Falola. You ask Kenyans about Twain Falola, very few will tell you they've read these books and so on. So there's need for that interface, for that synergy of linking the continent in a more robust manner that has been the case before, since the departure of our area.
Thank you. This is an issue that has bothered me, and I raised it in Kenya. I've been privileged to organize in Kenya a major conference attended by many people. And I've been privileged to have given lectures at Kenyatta University. And with Peter Wekesa, I've raised this issue, and now we can overcome it. In fact, I tried to convene a Pan-African conference in Niger to bring together Lusophone, Francophone, Anglophone scholars to bridge that divide. Unfortunately, the government that agreed was overthrown by a coup. And I've had the opportunity to tell Peter, in the age of the virtual, we can be very dynamic in bringing people together. Look at this event. Look at this event on Zoom alone, over 300, on various media. We are now close to 10,000. I'm not checking. We're going to reach almost 1 million in different platforms. So we have the opportunity now to convert technology into our own advantage. And part of what we should do, using Ogot's death, is to see how do we re-energize ourselves? How do we bring ourselves back? I've written books on Ghana. I've written a co-edited book on Kenya. This would not have happened without my own background, without that context, without that interaction. And it's something we need to bring back. So, who knows the story of how Professor Ogot left philosophy and mathematics to become an historian? Who among you is familiar with this story? I could see
I'm familiar with the story. Yes, I'm familiar with the story because
Mary, Mary, what do you know about this?
Okay.
Actually, I don't know much about that. I think Professor Amutabi knows more on that. I think
you are smiling, so I thought you wanted to. Fred, you know anything about this?
I will say this. 1995, we were at Egerton University conference, and Professor Ogot was a keynote speaker. When he arrived, we were all inspired to see him. And my background is not history. Professor Ogot believed in interdisciplinary research way before his fellow scholars realized the importance of interdisciplinary research in addressing the grand challenges that we face. So he studied mathematics, and he studied philosophy, and studied history. And I remember him saying, when his professor who taught him his teacher who taught him at Alliance learned that he had changed his major from mathematics to history, the teacher was shocked. And that's all I heard him say. The rest I leave to Professor Amutabi to give us some insights how this happened.
Maurice, what do you know?
on many occasions, he shared the transformation from the mathematics teacher to historian. And some of his students were always on his case in major conferences on why he left mathematics for history, because they reckoned that he was a very, very good math teacher. And one of them had just become a professor of mathematics at the University of Nairobi. And he was saying that why he left math for history, he could never understand or fathom that. But on many occasions when he mentioned this, and I think over 5 times, he gave us a rendition of why he transformed from mathematician to historian. And one of the remarkable points he raised was that when he went to St. Andrews University in Scotland, he was supposed to go and study mathematics, philosophy, and history for his degree. Being taught first British history or colonial histories of the Scottish, and then he transformed, and the mathematics is already fixed. The formulas are already established. They are already teaching mathematics, already structured. But an area that he could change to him was history. And what he wanted to do that he did successfully was recognizing and putting oral sources or oral traditions as important sources of history. And he thought that by taking history, he'll actually be able to implement that. And he did that successfully. When he returned to Makerere with a master's degree, they made him a lecturer, and they started to experiment on the collection of materials using oral sources. So they went to do his PhD under Professor Roland Oliver. They were reluctant to accept oral sources, but citing people like Jan Van Sien and others.
So, Eunice, let me ask you a question.
To be convinced that actually transformation was that history could allow him to perform, because mathematics was very a captive subject compared to history. Yes.
Thank you, Maurice. Eunice.
Yes, sir.
Will I be correct if I describe Grace Ogot as a powerful woman? Will I be correct?
I would say it depends on what you mean by powerful, because there is power of love and there is power that's otherwise. If we are talking about a powerful person in terms of a loving person, I would agree with you and say Grace Ogot was a powerful woman.
So
why do
how do we now use a powerful woman to understand Bethwell Ogot?
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that, because we would not understand Ogot without knowing something about Grace, the way I know Professor Ogot, because Grace Ogot was very instrumental in the life of Professor Bethwell Ogot in every sense of the word. By the time they were getting married, remember, Grace Ogot was had already practiced as a nurse, had already health practitioner, had already practiced as a journalist, had already practiced as a diplomat, even, you know. She was already a big person in the sense that she was interacting with very powerful people and representing very powerful constituencies. Later on, she became a member of parliament, and later on, she was actually an assistant minister. And these roles had a lot of bearing on the work of Professor Bethwell Ogot. You and I know that whatever we do in the public sphere is facilitated by our private spheres, so that there is no disconnect, there is no dichotomy between public life and private life. So Professor Bethwell Ogot's private life was very much determined by the different roles that Professor Grace Ogot played. And we know this because on a number of occasions, Professor Ogot would speak about his wife very, very fondly and in a very admiring way. He was admiring and was saying, this is a powerful woman. She's able to do 1, 2, 3, 4. I can't do that myself. She's able to meet, my needs as a father, my needs as a family man, my needs at home, my needs even at the office. Even though she's so busy in her public life, her private life remains very secure. So we had on a number of occasions, even as a chancellor at Moi University, occasionally Professor Ogot would divert away from the public theme or topic to talk about his private life, and most of the time he would be talking about Grace, his wife. And this is why I feel so strongly that if anybody is happy now, it is Professor Ogot, because he just got to sit or stand or lie next to his wife.
Thank you.
I could go on.
I will come back to you. I saw Professor Ashiwaju, who has joined us. Professor Ashiwaju, I don't know whether you are listening. Please, can you spotlight him, Professor Anthony Ashiwaju? The last time I was in Kenya, people were asking me about his book, and I sent them the electronic copy. And I also was there at a time when someone was finishing his degree on boundary. And Peter Wekesa is here, who also wrote a book on boundary. Professor Ashiwaju, are you there? Can you? So, you may not know that you are very popular in Kenyatta University. And it's good to join us, because otherwise I would not have brought out this story. I was there to host a conference, and somebody was just finishing his PhD, and he was looking for your book, which I sent to him. Professor, can you do your camera a little bit more? Can you raise yourself up? Yes. Thank you. What do you remember of this Ogot moment, sir? What do you remember?
First, I want to thank you, Tony, for always doing this for us. I got the notification for this meeting only last night, and I determined to be in it. I missed the previous ones. I want to thank you, Professor Ogot. Tony, you may not know this, was my external assessor for the professorship in 1978. There were two that I got to know were my assessors, external assessors. The other one is Professor Azan at the University of Khartoum. Both of them were great colleagues and friends of Professor Ade Ajayi, whom you know was my vice chancellor, both in University of Lagos, and before that, my teacher in University of Ibadan. I just learned yesterday and only today confirmed that Ogot has joined the ancestors. May his soul rest in peace, and may the souls of all the others whom you have also so highlighted, Tony, in your writings. Ogot is the one we are celebrating today. Ajayi was another whom we have celebrated when he passed on in 1986. And Edu Buahen. I pray that you too, you already celebrated, you will be celebrated in Jesus' name. I'm glad about your putting on notice the book which you published, which is my compendium of field defining writings of the past 55 years on issues of comparative history and border studies. You notified me of it, and I want to thank you for it. It may interest you that the book is the subject of a webinar in May, Boundaries in Globalization, Borders in Globalization in Canada. Can you stop video? Hush. Okay.
So it's my fault. I didn't unmute myself. So I said your book is very well known in Kenya and in their department. And when I invited Professor Peter Wekesa to come and speak here at Austin, he spent a considerable time telling people about your great book. I just used the opportunity of seeing you to bring you. And you could see in talking about his own professorship, that network of interaction, papers to Kenya, papers to Khartoum. Now we have been a little bit slack in all this promotion. And today you can be a professor of Kenyan history and your colleagues in the next university may not know you. We have ourselves to blame for this. So mentorship is always very important. Mentorship is always very important. Who has an experience to relate to us about this? Any experience of Ogot's mentorship that Mary or Eunice or Fred that you are familiar with?
I think Professor Anne Nangulu is here, ambassador to Senegal, Kenya's ambassador to Senegal. As one of Ogot, she can say something because she's also on the chat. Professor Anne Nangulu, the immediate former principal for
Professor Nangulu, let's bring you in. Well, please keep talking about the mentorship when.
Okay, I'll say something before Professor Nangulu joins us. So mentorship is an important topic, and when I think of Professor Ogot, we need to think about formal mentorship and informal mentorship. To his students and colleagues, Professor Ogot was more than a professor. He was a mentor who saw potential in each person who crossed his path. He didn't just teach history. He taught us how to think, how to question, and how to seek truth. If you listen to him speaking, you would leave the room very, very inspired. And as I noted earlier, he was able, I would say he was futuristic. He was able to see the importance of interdisciplinary approaches to solving grand challenges that we face as a society. At the conference I mentioned at Egerton University, somebody asked him in the audience, "Professor, tell us how you remain so young in thinking, in how you look." And he looked at the audience and smiled and said, "You want to know my secret?" And he said, "This is how I've managed to remain young. I've surrounded myself with the young people." And that was powerful to me because Most times, professors, we think we are so busy, we are so engaged, we have no time for people who are not officially assigned to us as mentors. So his mentoring framework is something we should emulate. You are not just a mentor to somebody you're officially assigned to, but whoever you come in contact with. We should play that mentorship role. And that is the best way we'll be honoring Professor Ogot.
Thank you. And you could see if this were a church, those of us on the Zoom and those of us on YouTube and Instagram, they will be standing outside the church. There's so many participating in this conversation. Are they able to locate the professor and the ambassadors?
Yes, the people organizing the gadgets, they need to unmute Professor Nangulu.
Yeah, but they have to look at. Is it her?
She has joined. She's on the links, but she's muted. So she's asking that she be unmuted.
Is it Ann Nangulu?
Correct.
I can locate her. Please, a technician.
Your team can locate her because
I can locate her. Can you spotlight her? Yes. Please.
Yeah. There she is. There she is.
Your Excellency, can you make your speech, please?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
She can't unmute herself, so you need to unmute her from your end as the host. Yeah, we can now hear you.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
I would like to just a minute.
And I think you are using two devices. Are you using two devices? Now we can't hear you again. It's not from our side, it's from your side. You have to unmute yourself, Your Excellency. You have to unmute yourself. Now, members of, yes, now you're fine now.
Let me first of all say that thank you for joining this, organizing this panel, and my greetings from Dakar, Senegal. I would like to say that I'm also a grandchild of Bethwell. And for me, I think I'd grown, we could joke and I could just call him Alan. And he used to say, I'm being very naughty. One thing to say is that I met him slightly earlier than Maurice and Eunice, because I can qualify to be their teachers. I actually taught Maurice when I was a graduate assistant at the University of Nairobi. And one thing I would like to say is that for me, Professor Bethwell Ogot was history in itself. And you asked the question, how did he move from mathematics to becoming a historian? And I remember him telling me one time that history is humanities, it's figures, it is art, and mathematics is history. So for him, he looked at the history of things. And anytime you sat with him, he'll make a history on any aspect that you are talking about. So he was actually he looked at the history of things as they come up. When it comes to mentorship, the best I can say is that he had a unique way of mentoring. And he used the seminars. I want to also say that I don't know why we killed the seminars. When I was a student at the University of Nairobi, I'm pleased to say that I was a honor student, and I did what the University of Nairobi called 311. That is my first degree history, later on master's history, PhD history, And the first thing, being an undergraduate, I was introduced to the seminar series at the Department of History that were always being held on Wednesdays. Maurice put it so well that we were the people who could give the pens, but the likes of the late Were, my friend, Professor Atieno Odhiambo, who was the nephew of Were, and Professor Ogot, they always allowed us to say something during the seminars. And for me, that is a great sign of mentorship. Number two, whenever, as Maurice put it very well, there was a public lecture or an inaugural lecture on the universities, we were the people to prepare, and he made sure we sat in front with him. And to me, that is mentorship. He did it in his own way. And out of it, also the Historical Association of Kenya, for me, that is mentorship. He gave us opportunity to attend these meetings in various places, and we always had to say something. I would also like to say that later on, I rose in the university ranks, and I've been a member of management now quite some time. Before now, I came to be appointed as ambassador. I'm still in the Department of History, so people should not think I've left. I'm still the professor at Moi University in the Department of History. And when Bethwell Ogot was the chancellor of the university, the last, I should say, the two conferences that were organized for Historical Association, he made me organize them because he told me, now you have come of age. So we were in the background, but we were the ones organizing. So to me, that is mentorship. The challenge, as you have said, is that to all of us, what happened? Why aren't we mentoring? Why has killed the Historical Association of Kenya? Even me, I have no excuse. I've been in positions where I can just hold this, but I don't know. Is it because people got scattered? Is it, as you say, a new generation coming in and they don't see the use of meeting physically or virtually? But this is something that we have to talk about it. But Ogot made that in so many ways, including those who wrote with him. Let me just allow me to say something about how he viewed Grace Ogot, just to add on what my friend, Professor Eunice Kamaara, has just put up. He told me this story, and now that I'm ambassador, I thought about it, that when Grace Ogot was appointed the assistant minister, and they went for dinner, all the people had been used to be accompanied by the first ladies. So now he asked me, was I now the first lady of Ogot? So he said, nobody called us the first gentleman or a first man. So when they said the first ladies, I just woke up and I was with the ladies. And he made a joke, he said to him, it didn't matter because that is the position that he had that time, and he was signifying humanity without gender. And we could laugh about it. So once in a while, I could also tell him, can I welcome you as the first lady? And he told me, I have no problem welcoming me, but I'll only whisper to him, of course, I'll not do that. But to me, I remained a small girl to him. When he was a chancellor at Moi, every time he came for the meeting, he made sure that I have to check if he's smart. But Ogot was always smart, but he will also ask me, Nangolo, am I looking very smart or not yet? And I'll tell him, you are looking superb, let's go. I also had an opportunity to interact with him together with the Professor Atieno, Professor, my friend William Billy Ocheng. And one thing that people should know that Professor William Ocheng, even when he's sitting with you in the room and he wants to talk something about you bad, he will post it in the post office. So you receive a letter from him, and that is sitting with you. So one time Ogot asked me and said, now that you are with the Ogot or with the Ocheng, do not get these bad manners of sending people post office mails, just talk to them. So I could get their mentorship and their respect. And one of the times, me and Professor, when I was a master's student now, I think I was getting of age, me and Professor, the late Atena Tiambo, I asked Ogot, and I asked Ogot, I asked Were, I asked Murioki, and Henry Mwansi. Then I asked them, what is this business of making Africans meandering from one place in migrations of the Southern Luo, the Kipsigis, the Kikuyu? Then I said, you want to say that Africans have always moved without rest? Why don't you make them in your books rest so that they settle? And Ogot just looked at me and said, even now you are on the move. That's why you are here at University of Nairobi. I think let me stop, and when something else comes.
No, but I have some questions for you, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
So the seminar series, that's also the tradition that I grew up with.
Yes.
But as university expanded,
yes,
without planning,
yes,
with instructions from our political bosses,
yes,
the government,
yes,
forcing us to admit more students than the infrastructure can take,
yes,
those traditions begin to decline. I have somebody here, I won't mention his name, in Kenya, who has to grade the papers of 1,000 students. How do you ask a professor to grade 1,000 students? So how can we correct this carelessness? How can we recognize that if we don't do this training very well, we're also destroying the nation? If we don't build capacity, if we don't build knowledge economy, how do we grow? How do we move forward? You are in Senegal. I know Anta Diop University.
yes,
100,000 students, I think.
yes.
How do you build a university of 100,000 students without infrastructure, without technology? How? How can we restore our balance? How can we do this?
One, I would like to say maybe where I sit, I've had opportunity, not now just to teach history, but also to be a policymaker in Kenya. And what happened is that at some stage I had a very strategic position, being at the Commission for University Education, regulating education in the whole country. That's university education, where I was in charge of the standards and the quality of university education, and also as the deputy CEO. I would like to say that the role of policy plays a major role. And the academicians, sometimes we forget to play this great role in policy. And if you look at it in the standards, I'll just use what I did. I managed to place in the standards the whole idea of adjunct and academic leadership. I trained in the US, my PhD. So I was trying to bring in what the West does, that you will have a professor, you have graduate assistants or teaching assistants or academic staff. I call them academic staff. But I would like to say is that once it's on the board, we put it in the standards. It is still there. Even now, nobody has arrested. But I expected that us, ourselves as academicians, to raise a voice and insist on the teaching load, and insist that we also need to just to move on, benchmark with what is being done somewhere else. Even US, the universities have 90,000 students, but they have mechanisms. Nafukho will tell you, is there. Mary Nyangweso, I know all of them, they will tell you, but none of us picked it. We left it to the unions. I would like to say that if we pick it as academicians, this can be funded. And if it's funded, we can also try to not only to lock out the Africans who qualify to students to go to university, but we put in place the quality mechanisms that can assist for us, our workload to be assisted, and at the same time, we focus on what those seminars and mentorships and supervision that we are also doing. I don't want to blame anybody. It is there. It's not late because we're historians. We can pick it up and move up with it. And some of us have been there. In the case of Kenya, I will also say that recently we had a presidential working party that we put in a lot of recommendations in reform. Even now they are meeting on implementation. I saw very few professors come in to say something, yet it's a burden at the university. Having said that, the world also moved. With COVID, let me move from policy and talk about the quick wins. With COVID, the world moved. The world has become digital. Today we are doing this digitally. We can still do the hybrid. We can still do the blended. We can still do whatever you want to call it, and we can still come up and hold the seminars. I know very well that at that time, the seminars used to be funded by government. But like I know at the University of Nairobi, it was part and parcel of the academic work. But now we can also look at it and look at it in the sense now maybe you bring in a new funding that you request the university to buy for us a Zoom license or something, and sometimes they're not very expensive per year, and we still move up. Maybe my two contribution is let us also be proactive to play a role in policy, but that said, let us also transform ourselves to embrace the transformation based on the digital platforms, and we meet. Those are my two contributions.
Please wait behind as an honorary panelist. So members of the audience,
thank you.
Please raise your hand or your finger if you want to make a contribution. It is now thrown open to anyone who wants to talk. You are welcome. Bennett Odiambo. Bennett Odiambo, please make your contribution. Bennett Odiambo. Please go ahead.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. If I may just say thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I am not a historian, but from what is going on, I have become history because I've joined big historians. I'm a geologist by profession, and I'm a professor of geoscience and environment at the Technical University of Kenya. For me, as we mourn the giant, I would rather call it the giant professor, I have only two things to say. Maybe one, I picked it from the poem that Eunice gave. And I was saying that I do not agree also. Just let me say it 1 minute. Why African scholar? And I say I do not agree. But a renowned world historian, I agree. I think mine ends there. Now, just the other thing that I wanted to say is that for me, Professor Alan Ogot is an informal mentor, just like Fred said, an informal mentor. But why? Because during those days, late 70s, I was a geology student in Chiromo in the University of Nairobi. But I loved one thing. One thing is that the academic accolades behind his name. And I thought this was really one of those things that one would aspire to be, you know, and even as a geology student, I did occasionally sneak into some of those lectures at main campus, and I thought this is something very nice. Of course, my main contribution really here is just to say, pass my condolences and join the colleagues of in this great moment. But there's something also that I maybe want to shed some light on. It bothers me. You are asking this thing about seminars. I have been trying to organize seminars for quite some time. So I did it very successfully when I was in South Africa. And when I came back, I'm trying to see this. But you find something very interesting that many scholars are not comfortable even to give a talk on what they did as their PhD projects or as a PhD students. And that bothers me quite a lot because, you see, if you did your work properly, you should be able to tell us, even off the cuff, on what you did. And that's what they used to tell me. Then my role mentors were the likes of Francis Ojani and in geomorphology and Odingo. And you should be able to say it off the cuff. And I think this is one of the challenges that now we are facing as academics, where I can tell you without batting an eye that a lot of students, PhD students, are not worth it because they are not able to be interrogated and tell us what is the problem. And so I think I want to stop there because for us to be able to run these seminars effectively, one should be able to tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think
thank
that's
you, Odhiambo. Let me tell you, hold on. So if you don't create a diversified economy, it's difficult to create great universities. When I finished my first degree, I had 5 jobs. And I started as a civil servant. And I didn't like the job. And I went to do a PhD because of passion, not because of remuneration. But today, people finish their first degrees, no job. They go ahead and do their masters, no jobs. Then they go and do PhD. And sometimes they get jobs, sometimes they don't get. So there are issues of policies, but there are also issues around interest, in which people are dragging them to the campuses, we are dragging them to go and teach. They are being forced to produce papers. And now we are now doing quantitative analysis, 1 paper 3 points, 1 book 5 points, in which the person will say, okay, no problem. He will look for predatory journals and say, now 15 points, promote me. So that the system, we have to rethink the entire system, as the ambassador has said. Professor Simon Mary Nyangweso, it's your turn. Thank you, Odhiambo. Benny, Odhiambo, Professor Mary, your comment. Please go ahead. Simon Mary.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much for that. I appreciate the humor also that has been said about the late professor. I would like to touch on the question you've raised, Tony, Professor Falola. I teach in the United States, a professor of theology here at the University of Portland. I teach 3-3 load and no more than 30 students in a class. So a semester I teach 90 students. And that's still a lot because I have to do research and all that stuff. But looking at Nigeria, when you made the comment, said somebody is teaching, grading 1,000 papers. No matter how intelligent they are, we have killed that talent. Because the scholarly life, does not arise from grading papers. It's from thinking and talking and writing and doing those research and teaching. The system is not just revamping the system. I also think that the governments in Africa have not yet understood that the development they are dreaming about, the foundation of that development can only be planted in institutions of learning. So it's not we want engineers to build roads, but we want engineers who are formed to think critically and outside the box. And it only occurs in the university environment. So, and secondly, where are the endowments? We have billionaires in Africa, but they're not endowing professorships in Africa, institutions, but some of them would rather come to the West that has enough money already because they want that glory. So maybe the governments need to think about research institutions in Africa, not just university. Every town has to have a university or state, but that these are research houses, and then they are well endowed, and then the best of the students go there, because all of us who are working outside of the continent, we all had our foundation in Africa. So if it means that we have a very good foundation, we just need to keep building on that so that it can flourish for the continent. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Yo, Ambassador Piego Cheluge, I apologize. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing your name very well. Sir, I sincerely apologize that I didn't.
No, thank you, Professor. My name is Ambassador Kipiego Cheluget. So it's Kipiego Cheluget. Is not, you have not badly off. I am speaking to you from Eldoret in Kenya. I am a former ambassador of Kenya in Zambia and Malawi, but also worked for COMESA and East African Community. But before that, the reason I really want to say something about Professor Bethwell Ogot is because he was my head of department. There's a short time that I was at Kenyatta University. And it is a memorable time because Professor Ogot was our head of the department, and he was like a towering figure over there. But let me say this, that during the time, some very great professors also were among the lecturers who became great people. I can mention Professor Tiambe Selesa, who is now at Howard University, the late Korir Mosonik. Unfortunately, he passed on. Another great person who was there in the department was William Ocheng. I think many of you know him. And Professor Henry Mwanzi, and a lady who wrote a lot about the Mau Mau, Professor Tabitha Kanogo, who is based in UC Berkeley. So I was there briefly and later on joined Moi University. But one of the memorable things I remember about the presence of Ogot, especially when it comes to aspects of history, was how he made you feel so proud of being African, that he explained our history in such a way that you became proud of it. Because in many ways, when you read African history, it was being referred to as the Dark Continent, and that these people, probably Africans, were moving aimlessly. But together with people like B.E. Kipkorir, Bethwell brought to life our history, and especially the communities, the Luos, the Kalenjins, all the communities, to understand how they came to be. And not only that, I think he also contributed a great deal to mentorship. And you can see, just for some of us who just in the being lecturers, some of them are now great scholars around the world. I did not pursue that line, but I must say that perhaps I pursued the diplomatic line and rose to be an ambassador of Kenya. So I can also attribute that to that kind of inspiration. And of course, I cannot forget his wife, Grace Ogot. When you read her book, The Promised Land, if you're in high school, you get this feeling of encouragement. And it's like you are living in a dream world. And the two were like a perfect couple. And, you know, I pay tribute to these two for the great contributions they have given to scholarship, not only to Kenya, but Africa, the diaspora, and the rest of the world. So let me say that. Let me just stop there, Professor. If you have any questions, I can probably attempt to. Let me also say that I'm very proud that...
Ambassador Cheluget, what advice would you give me in terms of creating a legacy for God? Should I initiate a prize in his name at Moi or Nairobi? Should we set up a small historical institute in his name? What advice do you want to give?
I think hopefully the government of Kenya can take it up, that to create, maybe even build a special place, a library in honor of Professor Ogot.
I don't think they need to build a library. They can name an existing library.
Yes.
Because if we approach them and say, go and build something new, then they will say, where is the money?
No, I think the money will come for sure. And I know great people, those who have worked, like for example, if you know about Tiambe Selesa, he's from Malawi at Howard. He's like an institution by himself. Most of these people, even Tabitha Kanogo, they will bring all the ideas. But let me also say this, that I really subscribe to, and I feel sorry that we're not having many of these meetings by scholars. During those days in the 80s and 90s, there were so many seminars happening. We don't see them happening as much. And I think it is really up to us, especially, you know, this group that is here, more than 300 of us, to create something. I think I don't hear much about the African Studies Association. And I think we need to really create something vibrant. And there are many others who have contributed a great deal. And especially from the Luo community, I must say, people like Robert Ouko, for example, was a great mind. People like William Ochen, many Gideon Were, and many others really need to be. We should have a way of remembering them and giving a tribute to the great contributions they gave to scholarship.
Thank you. And I happen to know the names you have been mentioning, which is the point I made like over 30 minutes ago about this, a time when we all knew one another, and today when we hardly know one another, even in universities that are close to one another like Nairobi and Kenyatta. Jatelo Rigo. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Your Excellency. Jatelo. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yes, good evening. I'm Morara John. I'm Morara John from Kenyatta University. Yes, I was initiated into this group by Dr. Peter Wekesa, my lecturer. And I'm so proud to be in this meeting, actually, in that some of us need to be historians too. Actually, I'm so proud to be here. Actually, we need to get more connections on how we should be having the links to these groups so that we can be joining. Yeah, I was in, there's a poem that Eunice Kamaara, the poem of Eunice Kamaara. Please, can you pardon the poem? I want to say something there. Eunice, please, if you...
What do you want her to do?
I want her to redo the poem.
No, we won't have the time for her to apologies. We don't have that time. But hold on. But this is being recorded. 2 minutes is recorded. 2 minutes after this event, we will release the entire transcript, and you can listen to the poem again. Thank you very much. I'm very happy you are interested in history. I was on your campus last year, 2 years ago. Peter Wekesa, Kenyatta University History Department.
Thank you very much, Prof. I hope I'm audible enough.
You are.
I just want to first thank you for mobilizing us to this very useful session. And I also want to thank the panelists for those very lively conversations around the late Professor Ogot. I think when I raised my hand, I wasn't too sure where I was going to begin my conversation from, given that I belong to the generation of what I may call the great grandchildren. Now that the grandchildren have spoken, the only thing I think I wanted to bring to the notice as I listened to the talk around mentorship, and I got this right from Professor Amutabi, where are Ogot's sons and daughters? Maybe this is where we need to begin our discussion. Where are they? Because maybe they have, where did they keep the baton? Because they needed to hand them over to you as the grandchildren, so that you hand them over to us as the great-grandchildren. I think that's more useful for me. Professor Falola, thank you for bringing on board Professor Shiwaju. I usually call him the grandfather of the partitioned Africans. I really respect his ideas on boundaries in Africa. Had it not been for the intervention of Ambassador Jeruget, I think this is what I was going to make as a confession. I have read in the print media and of course online, great eulogies from Professor Falola. I have read one great one from Professor Maurice Amutabi. When I sat back, especially after reading Professor Amutabi's well-written piece, I asked myself, when somebody doesn't tell you a story, it disappears. Because the story of Professor Ogot in KU, Kenyatta University, is one that I think somebody needs to write about, because one of the major things that you need to realize, Professor Ogot spent about a decade, from 1984 to 1991 in KU. And the number of colleagues whom Ambassador Jeruget has mentioned, Professor Zeleza, William Ocheng, Professor Mwanzi, Professor Kanogo, and many, many others, Professor Priscilla Shilaro, all of them have actually made a very, very significant contribution to the history of this country and African history at large. I think one of the greatest developments out of the KU story, and I think this can be understood much more if you spoke to Professor Mwanzi, Henry Mwanzi, who is there now. Incidentally, both Professor Mwanzi and Professor Ogot were mathematicians before they became historians. But from their very early researches in history, I think one of the major contributions to Kenyan history is the migrationist approach in the study of African history, which I think Professor Mwanzi departed, writing the history of the Kipsigis from a purely evolutionary kind of thesis. And when he came to KU, that discussion really continued, and it generated a lot of discussions around most of the works that emerged out of KU. And I think the diversification into what we see later as economic history, which we see in Zeleza, is something that we need to rebuild. And I think one way of rebuilding this, and I'll turn this to Professor Amutabi, when I asked about the sons and daughters of Professor Ogot. As great grandchildren, we have been asking, where is our Historical Association of Kenya? Because I think this has been one of the mentoring space for all of us. We wouldn't really need a lot now that we have the space, the virtual space, which I think you see within a very short time, we can be able to coordinate. I have over 200 of my students attending this lecture today. And they are very anxious to listen to Ogot's contribution to African historiography in terms of the method and theory. So such forums would actually give us space to think big in terms of how we can match our historical discourses. So I think, Professor Falola, you are giving us a very useful space. You are, in fact, provoking all of us. I can see on this forum what I consider to be my greatest mentor when I joined KU, Dr. Godwin Murunga, who is the Executive Secretary of Podestia, is on the forum. He hasn't raised his hand. I hope I'm not going to provoke him to speak a word. But I think it's a very useful space for all of us to rethink our forms of interactions.
Thank you.
My question still runs, Professor Falola, and this goes to Professor Amutabi. Where are the sons and daughters of Professor Ogot if all of us are becoming grandchildren and great-grandchildren? Because we need to know the handover of the baton.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for your elevating contribution, and we take it from there. Bernard Shianya. Bernard Shianya. Yes, please. Unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor Falola. Can you hear me?
Correct, yes.
Thank you. I'll be brief, just 3 brief points. This is an excellent opportunity to interact, and we thank you, Professor Toyin Falola, and all those who have facilitated this. I'm Ben Sihanya. I teach intellectual property and consumer law at the University of Nairobi Law School. I'm also an advocate and work on Sihanya mentoring. 3 brief points for me in terms of the legacy of Professor Bethwell Ogot. Number 1, the question of history as knowledge, history as destiny. Number 2 is history and nation building. And number 3 is the question of interdisciplinarity influencing other disciplines, and how history has been used to influence other disciplines, actually including law. So briefly, for most of us, we got introduction to Professor Ogot in the early 70s. I remember when my father was doing private studies, and he would talk about Zamani by Ogot and other materials. And I was still a toddler, and I was wondering, who are these people who have written about Africa, Zamani, etc. Small, in my maybe just 10 years or something like that, even under 10. And we used to hear this, and over time we started reading about Professor Ogot and about questions of migration, questions of settlement, which became major debates in history, historicity, and historiography over the years. And then, of course, they contributed quite a lot, and Professor Ogot led this, and even the idea of the methodology using oral history has been debated in this forum and elsewhere. Then, of course, the question of migration and settlement being very important. How did we get here? Because even in Kenya, probably only 2 tribes were endogenous. And that was important, and still important to know how we got here. The second aspect is the question of history in the context of nation building and in the context of how we integrate culture and we learn about the past to know about the present and the future. And Professor Falola and Professor Atieno Diambo, you published a very important volume, The Challenges of History and Leadership in Africa, being essays of Professor Ogot. And this really summarizes a lot of the themes. It really contains most of the articles, but also a number of the themes that Professor Ogot engaged over the years. And this is a very, very major contribution. Of course, in the same breath, there was the book that he edited with Professor William Ochieng on decolonization and independence in Kenya, which has remained the most influential book on learning about the cultural, the economic, the political history of Kenya and how the struggle for independence panned out. Of course, he's over the years worked with the great historians in economic historians like Professor Tabitha Kanogo and others in the same breath. Finally, we have learned quite a lot from beyond, as he would call it, the question of history, historicity, historiography, and dealing with history as knowledge and the role of history in development. And actually, one of the articles that he wrote much earlier was the role of the arts in a developing country. And over the years, the theme of humanities, arts, and social sciences being equally important as STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. He's always argued that we should not, and this is the point some of us have learned quite a lot, that it should not a question of STEM versus humanities or arts. It's a question of what proportions of each. It's like saying a mother is better than a father perpetually. It's a question of seeing how best to use STEM and in what proportions, and to use arts, humanities, arts, and social sciences, including history, in our development. This is still a very relevant debate in Kenya because I've had some people spreading rumors that the humanities are not useful for our sustainable development process. So finally, in this context of interdisciplinarity, I recall engaging and consulting Professor Ogot when I was appointed, for example, as a vice chair of a national task force on education, and when I was also working with the UASU, University Academic Staff Union, in the context of a strike, and how do you deal with the questions of public policy in education? Because he had done quite a lot of work on this from an academic, but as well as from a very practical perspective. He had even been actually chancellor. So I remember he was very clear in his mind on the need to integrate, especially university education policy, and to make it more progressive than it has been in the past. So with all this, we really honor Professor Bethwell Ogot. For us also, for me as well, he's a grandfather, academic grandfather, but there are some things which we learned also directly from him. And may his legacy endure. He belongs now to the ages, both the living, dead, and he belongs to the ages, and his work will always endure. And some of us have current and recent memory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for your brilliant rendition full of history and knowledge. Fred Nasubo. Fred Nasubo? Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Toyin Falola. This is a very great and informative session. I also want to thank all the panelists for very, very insightful comments and which they have shared. My name is Dr. Fred Nasubo. I'm a lecturer at Taita Taveta University, teaching history. So on B. Ogot, personally, at a personal level, I have never interacted with B. Ogot, but I've been fortunate enough to interact with some of his books which he has written, especially on the history of Kenya. Secondly, I've had an opportunity to interact with some of his students whom he taught, and some of the mentees that he guided academically. And as a result of this interaction, some times back, we were able to organize a workshop, I think in 2023, based on one of his books on the footprints in the sands of time. And this was one of an important session that was organized at the British Institute in Eastern Africa as a way of training some of us young scholars, and even those who have never interacted or even met, that is Professor Ogot. So I think this is a very important session to most of us who are learning and would want to walk in that same path. There's a question which Professor Falola, you responded, and you also followed up on the legacy of Ogot. And I think one way we can honor Ogot is to bring all his books back to the shelves of the universities. Today, we have a very big challenge because for young researchers who want to write about Kenya, not just Kenya, but any topic that has been done already by B. Ogot, who is a towering academic, it is very rare to find most of his books on our university shelves. So I think an immediate step would be to look at how we can engage publishers and collect those books. I believe Ogot had his personal library. If we can find a way of engaging and doing that, will be doing justice as a way of keeping his legacy. Another thing is a question to the panel. A follow-up to what one of my colleagues has asked. In Kenya, we've had a debate on the relevance of history. And especially this debate has dominated the political spaces. And some sort of causing some confusion even to young scholars who would want to become historians. And some are wondering what is the relevance of history in a world where we are insisting on STEM courses. And now we have the issue of AI, which is revolutionizing not just work, but also research spaces.
Thank you, Fred.
So
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Fred. Fred has raised important issues of the continuity of history, the continuity of the humanities, the relevance of both, how to keep Ogot's memory alive, the books that he has left behind, and the possibility of reprinting his other books. I'm in contact with one of his sons, and some of these messages were passed on to him. Emusa, please go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Professor Falola. First of all, my condolences to Professor Ogot's family, his friends, his colleagues, and all his scholars, students, and grandchildren, and everybody. Again, I want to acknowledge acknowledge you. You were at USIU Africa. I think that was 2 or 3 years back, invited by Professor Paul Zeleza Diambe, and that was African Studies Association Africa, which was a very good forum. I know everybody here acknowledges the importance of having forums for academicians to come together to exchange ideas, to review ideas where we are as Africans. So again, I really appreciate all these events that you organize to bring all of us together to have discussions. And so we all acknowledge Professor Ogot for giving us history, great history about Africa, where we've come from, where we are going, and where we are. And that Africa, that history includes migration. And someone joked earlier on, like the African is always moving, or, you know, when are we going to stop? So we are not going to stop because the world is not, I mean, migration in the world is not going to stop. And this migration has also, you know, contributed to the usual issue of brain drain. And all our, you know, many of our scholars reside in the West, which is good because that is what the world is made of today. Things have changed. Her Excellency, you know, Ambassador Nangulu said, you know, earlier on that she said, you know, that what did she say? Professor Nangulu alluded. Sorry, I'm forgetting what she said, but in relation, you know, to what she said, yes, she said that the world has moved on. During COVID, the world moved on. And so the world has moved on in many ways. And so I'm thinking of the world has moved on and we are here at this particular time of history. What are the opportunities that we as, you know, the African Academy has, including technology, and how, for example, can we continue to engage our diaspora scholars through technology? You wondered how a professor can mark 100 scripts. It's undoable. But, you know, this is because the numbers of scholars, of students have increased, but without a clear match of training of faculty. And so that is a gap that our diaspora scholars can continue to support through technology. And you know, if faculty, if professors have to mark 100 scripts, you can imagine what happens to research. They don't even have time to do research. So how then can our diaspora scholars come in and we could have we could have collaborative research?
Thank you very much, Musa. The suggestion about the sixth region, the African diaspora, and linkages with our colleagues. Archdeacon, the name is not full. Archdeacon, yes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. My name is Professor S.M. Obuchi. I think that name just came by. Sorry for not giving full information about myself. Professor Samuel M. Obuchi from Kenya, Moi University to be specific. I know quite a number of persons who have contributed in this discussion, including Professor Nangulu, who has been my boss in Moi University. I want to make just one comment. I am a linguist, and I know that as a linguist, it is impossible to divorce other disciplines from issues pertaining to history. I think it's important to also consider other areas like linguistics, literature, and religion, and as to what kind of contributions they make towards making the historians that we know of today. We talk about history as if it's a standalone discipline. And yet when you come to theory, we have so many theories which apply across the board. For example, discourse analysis, critical discourse analysis, which gives us an understanding that history is part and parcel of other disciplines, and therefore it's important also to bring on board other notable figures such as Ngugi wa Thiong'o to such this kind of conversation. So then from this literary material, we can get to understand part of the history that we can talk about today. Maybe something else I would mention here, the information, the personality we are discussing was quite towering in Kenya and across across the continent. But the recommendations we are making here today, who needs these recommendations? How will they be implemented? I thought you mentioned something to do with getting to, so you asked somebody, what can we do? My recommendation is the following. Can we consider maybe a library that goes by his name? And beyond that, we can also consider other historians who may have gone by, but who were never mentioned. They may just come across in the footnote of history, but they have not been given any form of prominence. So, Mr. Organizer, it's important to just remember this big name, B.A. Ogot, including other notable figures across Africa who have made a huge contribution, but they were never mentioned. We never had a conversation of this magnitude. So then they can also be included. Their material can feature prominently in this kind of library and wherever it can be established. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll take some of these ideas further with our colleagues. These are great ideas. As we are talking, I'm even thinking of creating an Hall of Fame for the big historians you've mentioned, and we'll look for a place to locate it. Masolo Isaiah. Please, Masolo.
Thank you so much, Professor Falola, for this opportunity. Thank you, the panelists. I'm Masolo Isaiah, PhD students Kenyatta University. I came to know of this meeting through my supervisor, Dr. Wekesa. Thank you so much, Daktari, for letting me know this. And I really appreciate the role you are taking up, Daktari, Professor, for organizing such meetings. They are part of mentorship that you're really talking about, and it has become a discussion. I want to just remind you, Prof, that last year, was it last year that when we celebrated your good works in history at Kenyatta University, we raised this issue of mentorship. And indeed, Professor Aseka, Professor Amutabi were really on it, and we expected, as students, we expected to see more of this, so that as young upcoming historians, we can also get opportunity to learn the way you also learned to become who you are. But indeed, we are still looking forward for you. Just one suggestion that you're already doing it. Why can't you just make it a bigger network, expand your network from these major universities in Kenya and across East Africa and Central and West Africa? Get just a mentor from such university. As in Kenyatta University, we have already Dr. Wekesa. You can get few from other universities and make it a routine. Maybe in 3 months' time, we have a meeting where we can just meet and listen to them as they continue mentoring us. Let's leverage on technology, as most of the professors have said.
Thank you,
and
Masolo.
we will really appreciate. Thank you so much.
We will rely on people like you to become foot soldiers. As you are giving us advice, you will also become very active participant, because whether we like it or not, we have to hand over to you. The last person to make the intervention, Charlotte Mafumbo. I think we may take more. If we may take 2 more. Charlotte Mafumbo.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Falola, for giving me this opportunity. I'm an acting head of department at Makerere University, History, Archaeology, and Heritage Studies, and I join you all in celebrating the life of Professor Ogot. And of course, as an alumni of Makerere, I think we are celebrating his life in a very special way today. Thank you for bringing us together. The one thing that I wanted to join the others in celebrating is the spirit of mentorship and support that we are giving to each other. Allow me to thank Professor Wekesa for being our external examiner, for being someone who joins us and celebrates with us in the department. I would like to thank you, Professor Falola, for sharing with us your latest publications that we are using. I think this is the biggest spirit that we need to see that has grown out of our history, as well as the role that Professor Ogot played in what everyone here has professed. Allow me to say that in joining others in the recommendation, we should follow up in our own universities opportunities that others have had. In Makerere now we have a Nyerere Leadership Center. I would imagine that having a documentation center named after Professor Ogot would be great, because he's one of the main readings we do in historiography, in graduate school, in History 101. I don't know if people still have the same course codes. So I see that us having, Professor, you said the Hall of Fame, where we have him celebrated and appreciated, that would be one way. And allow me also to say finally that when you talked about seminars and where they went, the Department of History every other Wednesday has a seminar, and I shared the last call with you. We have someone who is going to talk about the Asians and their expulsion and what has happened after that. I would like to join all the rest in inviting you to attend some of these seminars, and please also invite us so that us and our graduate students can greatly contribute to the growth of history.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Yes,
Please
Professor.
send us the link, and I'm volunteering to give you a seminar virtual. Thank you very much. Kevin Kamiri. Kevin. Please go ahead, Kevin.
Hello, I hope I'm audible enough.
You are.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Mine is just to share on possibly coming up with a sort of script that can be put into a digital form. In this case, something like a movie that would represent the mind of Professor Ogot. I thought of this because of a book from David Mitchell, who speaks about history. He has a lot of information concerning the history of the Western world. And they managed to come up with something to do with the connection of how someone's actions in the past is able to influence the future. That my action right now as an individual affects another through the centuries. And I know there is a quote that is famous from Professor Ogot that talks about telling a story of a past to portray an inevitable destiny. So if it's possible to capture this with the aid of AI and maybe our actors and scripters, it is possible to come up with something that can
Thank you,
show
Kevin.
what he
That's a
visioned.
brilliant idea. Let's pursue it. That's a very brilliant idea. John Kamau. Please, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, and I like your wristwatch.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. My name is John Kamau. Besides being a columnist with the Sunday Nation in Kenya, a history columnist, I'm also a PhD student at the University of Toronto. And I'm very glad that you have come with this talk. I've got 2 points which I need to put forward. In case they have not been put forward, I think we need a very strong history society in Kenya as a lobby group and also as a forum in which we can discuss emerging issues. And I'm saying this because last week, I think 2 weeks ago, I wrote a piece in The Nation about the place of history for what used to be known as the government house and now known as the state house. And this was the first place I met Professor Ogot some times back when I was working as a journalist. And the kind of changes which have happened, I have seen the architects have raised their concern about the destruction of heritage. And I would hope that historians can also be able to have such a forum in which they can raise voices on fundamental issues affecting the place of history in the society. Number two, I would like, there's one thing which I've always questioned as a journalist and now as a historian. Why is our National Archives in the place it is today? Why is it so much run down? Can we have a voice in which we can retrieve the National Archives of Kenya from where it is near River Road and take it to a much more presentable place where the presentation of our history can be seen to be like we honor our history, because that place is never guarded even at night. If anything happens, all the Kenyan history from 1890 would disappear, all the written history. And I think these are some of the issues which we can be able to lobby in terms of protecting our heritage and also in terms of having a very strong lobby. And we are going to add to what Professor Ogot always said, that the voices of the ordinary Africans must also be recognized as the active agents in the production of history. And this has been one of his most profound contributions. And so we must protect our history, whether it is the colonial history, whether it is the heritage the colonial heritage which is part of our history, whether it is the African history, archaeological sites. We have to be the voice that speaks against any destruction of this history, because this is the legacy which we are going to leave behind. I think if we do that, we'll have paid a major tribute to what Professor Ogot has always been talking about, the place of African history from ages. And remember, Ogot says that our history should always start from archaeology going forward. So we have got millions and millions of history which we have to protect. And by having a strong lobby and a strong association, this is the only lobby which can protect it from politicians who are eager to destroy the history for their own good.
Thank you, John. And hopefully you will report this in your newspaper. And if you send me your contact, I will also send you the report on this conversation. Your Excellency, Ambassador Kikaya David, Your Excellency, Ambassador David, yes, sir. Please, sir. We can't hear you, sir. Why waiting for you to fix your technology? Joseph Kiplagat. Joseph Kiplagat? Joseph. Yes, Joseph. Please, sir, make your comments.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. Yes, my name is Ambassador Joseph Kiplagat from Moi University, Eldoret in Kenya. And I wish to make just a few comments with regard to the remembrance of Professor Ogot. The first one is that it inspired me, together with B.E. Kipkorir, to be a reluctant historian, because I'm actually a professional engineer. So engineer turned to a historian, because I said, after reading their books, that history is really good for Africa. So here I am, an engineer by profession, but I also an historian. And I want to remember that he is the one who, together with President Moi, started the second university of Kenya. It is written in one of the reports that in 1983, he came with President Moi to a bush, and President Moi pointed to the bushes and said, there shall be a university here. There will be a classroom here. There will be a library here. So Professor Ogot is quoted as saying, President Moi is the only human being who has got the university plan in his head. I remember that very well. Then later on, I was sent to Must to establish the university. And he was our chancellor. I remember in 2006, he came there and handed over the charter to Must in Kakamega. I remember very well when he was there, and he played a great role in the starting of that university. Again, I want to remember she inspired me to be a writer. I read her first book in 1968 when I was just in standard 5. The book was called Land Without Thunder. After reading it, I started writing, and I have never stopped. I've become a writer also because of her. So really, they are a great couple, and my condolences to the family and to the people of Kenya and the people of Africa.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Go ahead. You want to make your last point? You're having technical issues. You're having technical difficulties. We no longer can hear you.
Yes. What about now?
Yes, and I can hear you.
Yes. Last but not least, he is the one who edited the greatest of African history book, which is there online. Thank you very much, and he will remain forever in our memories.
So what is your secret of looking so young?
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yes, I think it is being mentally active and writing books and writing stories and writing articles. And of course, also, I'm also an engineer. I'm still teaching at Moi University School of
Engineering. What is the lake behind you? There seems to be a lake in your background. Where is that?
Oh, this one is in Kenya. It's an ongoing construction of a dam in Nakuru.
Okay.
So I've decided to make it a background because actually that is one of my areas I admire, changing our African lakes into sources of electricity and irrigation.
Okay.
It's called Itare Dam in Nakuru, Kenya.
Yeah. Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of the audience participation. So I will give all our panelists the opportunity to make their closing statements, what they forgot. Odondi, out of respect, I will let you speak because I want to close this program. Odondi, please recognize Odondi. Odondi, because great ideas have come from members of the audience. Odondi. Well, Odondi has changed his mind or her mind. So closing statements from our panelists. Odondi, we called you. Can you locate him? Can our technicians locate him? Odondik, we are not able to locate you. Apologies.
I'm here.
Now, do your talking. Do your talking.
Thank you, Professor, for organizing this forum. My name is Odondi. I have a personal tribute to the late Professor Bethwell Ogot. I am a professor of statistics at the University of Oxford. And before my interaction with the late professor in relation to mentorship, he was my informal mentor. I recall her teaching from Moi University. I was teaching part-time in Maseno in 2001. And I met him and asked him, why did you leave mathematics, which is my profession, for history? And he told me, mathematics is definite, history is dynamic. I asked him to expound on that, and he told me, in the olden days, when you solve a sum or a question, you write QED, quite easily done, not in history. So I asked him, how would you define the history? He told me, history helps you understand yourself for your own self-identity. And I think I'm a mathematician by training, but a historian at heart. Back to your question of what legacy would we have for the late professor? I come from his Luo tribe. The Luos have one say, death brings two extremes, chaos or unity. Thank you for organizing this to bring unity and people who can say something good and otherwise about the professor. And I think the only thing that we would think of what we have learned outside here in the West. Can we have maybe, if there is already an endowed professorship named after him, extend it to other universities where he has footprints? And an institute in his name where you and Mafumba said we would have a hall of fame. There are so many distinguished scholars before him, but he would house them under his umbrella. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last member of the audience, you're a mathematician, and I'm very happy that we'll return to history. We will abandon mathematics for history. As we close this program, Maurice Amutabi, your closing statement. Unmute yourself. It's not from us. It's not from our technical partners.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, Oroch Pido had been raising his hand, and Professor Oroch Pido was served by Professor Ogot when he was the Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Nairobi. Oroch Pido, during a cultural week, where students behaved freely, they threw a professor in the mud as part of the celebration, and he was almost expelled. And Professor Ogot served his career as a university student. He's on the audience now. Can I give him a minute? Can I see the minute to him?
Paul, don't recognize.
Professor Pido.
Paul, where are you?
Professor Odoch Pido. Odoch Pido, could you unmute yourself and maybe contribute something? Or raise your hand?
Professor Amutabi has yielded his last statement to you.
Okay, let me say something as he comes on board. I wanted to just point out that I'm so glad of the contributions from the audience. Those are very important points in terms of legacy of Professor Bethwell Ogot. And one of the areas that I think has been illuminated is reviving the Historical Association of Kenya. This afternoon, I saw a very lengthy debate and discussion on the wall of the Historical Association of Kenya. I saw Dr. Pondo, I saw my classmate Kule and others indicating that we should form a committee to revive the association, and I'm on board. I saw my name has been proposed as one of the 7 members to revive the organization, and I'll be willing to host the first meeting at the Tech University of Kenya where I work, and I'll be happy to participate in reviving the organization so that we get it back to where it was. And I think the question by Dr. Wekesa was that where are the sons and the daughters? I know that there were very many people like Professor William Ochieng, Atieno Diambo, Bida Kanogo, all those, and even us as grandsons of Ogot, we should be able to continue that legacy by mentoring the way he mentored and also promoting scholarship in a very fair and balanced manner. Then I wanted also to recognize the role that our historians are playing, Dr. Wekesa, Dr. Gona, in all the campuses in Kenya, in all the universities in Kenya. We need to have a common forum, a common front that we have in the interdisciplinary pursuit, multicultural, multidisciplinary pursuit, that we had to meet people like Professor Eunice Kamaara, people like Pamela, Nyangweso, and so on. And I was happy that Professor Anne Nangulu was on board today to share her views, and she didn't remind us, she didn't remember the great dance she had with the Professor Ogot at the Kericho Tea Hotel, that everybody cheered when they got on the stage to open the floor for us to dance at the Kericho Tea Hotel. You didn't bring that up, Nangulu, and now you are a great dancer you are.
I felt shy. I felt shy.
Thank you, Maurice.
So he was a great dancer as well, but I wanted to finish by indicating that I think one of the honors we can do is that we should dedicate some books in his honor by Historical Association of Kenya, and I think I can initiate that and take the leadership role in that, and then take up what Professor Falola suggested, a Hall of Fame, so that at least Ogot becomes the first member of that Hall of Fame, as well as creating an honor, some honor that people can compete for, some prize named after B. Ogot, the way the African Studies Association has done in America. So thank you very much. Because of time, let me rest my case there. If Professor Orozio is there, give a minute.
Professor Nyangweso, your closing statement.
Thank you so much, and for participating and for listening to very good contributions from members who joined us today. I just want us to remember the inspiration that Bethwell Ogot has left us, the mentorship component of it, recognizing knowledge where it is, regardless. As scholars, sometimes we don't identify knowledge, but Professor taught us you don't critique to destroy, you critique to inspire and encourage. So let's be mentors to our young generation so that we can continue the journey. If he had critiqued our work at Kericho, I don't think some of us would have probably continued. So he encouraged us, even though we were doing the flimsiest work at the time. He encouraged us because he saw something in us. So let's learn to tap into that abilities and tap in the abilities of our younger generation to encourage them to grow. That's one thing I just wanted to mention about him. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Nafukho.
Again, thank you, Professor Falola, for facilitating this very, very significant event. To all the participants who have participated, we want to express our gratitude to you for honoring Professor Ogot. And as we bid farewell to this great son of Africa, we remember that his legacy lives on in the countless students, academicians that he inspired and mentored formally and informally, including many of us in the audience, in the institutions he helped build and lead, and in the profound truth he taught us, that every human being is a custodian of our collective memory. We all need to tell our stories. That is the best way we'll honor Professor Ogot. Thank you.
Professor Kamaara, your closing statement.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Falola, for organizing this great event. It's really humbling. And thank you to everyone who has contributed this evening, even just logging in. It's a great honor to Professor Bethwell Alan Ogot. I would like to close by emphasizing that from where I sit, I see Professor Bethwell Ogot as one of the great feminists in Africa. And what makes me say these are many things, but I need to mention that Professor Grace Akinyi Ogot published 3 books posthumously, courtesy of her husband, Professor Bethwell Ogot. I borrow the last statement from John Kamau, who had a beautiful column in the Daily Nation today. There are African historians And then there is Professor Bethwell Ogot. Condolences to the family. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Amen.
Thank you. Ambassador Nangulu, you want to make any closing statement?
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof. I would like to say that first, condolence to the family. And personally, I know Professor Madara, and I just want to say that to my friend Madara, we mourn and we say sincere condolences to the family. And I'd like also to say that the quick win of the legacy is for us to have a seminar series that can start us off. A seminar series which can be in honor of Professor Bethwell Ogot. And this series, we do not only make it Kenyan, but we now, as I said, the world changed with COVID, and we can be doing it even just to have a panel, talk about history, and in the process, we can also think about the Hall of Fame, as you have said, that can make this seminar series to honor our historians. But I want to maybe let this, if Professor Amutabi said they are going to meet to have the historical association, then I would like to also give him another small burden that he can write, and if he wants me to assist to call, I have no problem. We can write to University of Nairobi, write to Kenyatta University, write to Moi University and Maseno, particularly where Ogot had big footprints, as I would say. And then through the Vice Chancellor's Committee, which is there in Kenya, we request through them, and they can reach the PS. As my friend Ambassador Jacob noted, that we write to say that we feel it should be honored. And if it is a library or whatever academic, something to be honored, and we should not shy off to ask. And we can use that as the avenue to do it. And all the other suggestions we have put in place, but for me, I would like to say that we start what can be workable or contribute to a book chapter, and we can do that. Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you for doing this, and thank you for bringing us all to mourn Professor Ogot in a scholarly and in an academic way of mourning. Thank you, and I salute all who managed to be with us today. Thank you very much.
On behalf of our team, our consultants, technical partners, and those who have joined live, Instagram, YouTube, televisions, radio stations, audiences in 17 countries who have joined us, not on Zoom, but by other platforms, I cannot thank you enough. I'm very happy that the audience is huge and impressive. 2 minutes, we will release the entire recording to the world within 2 minutes. And we are going to close this conversation by playing music for those of you who are interested. Next week, Sunday, we are going to bring to the chair of interviews a Nigerian activist by the name of Dele Farotimi, an activist who has been talking about law, politics, and society. And we're also going to bring the president of the Africa Development Bank, Adeshina. And we are going to have an academic discussion on Afrofuturism in the weeks ahead. Thank you very much. We look forward to you joining us in our other programs. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.